Hi, Murray.
Welcome. I'm just admitting people. All right. Turn off my live transcription. All right. Good evening, everybody. Have about 10 folks this evening. I'm sure we're going to have more join. We have, for right now, a little bit of a skeleton crew from the city. The rest of the staff is finishing up a youth workshop talking about the alternatives. So that's pretty exciting. We're getting out and talking to lots of folks. How a handful of you were on the last meeting. Let me just say how we recommend this meeting work. Essentially, this is an office hours. It's an opportunity for you all to ask us questions on the February 2nd GPAC workshop. There really was not a lot of time for discussion. It was more a presentation of information. We recognized that it was like drinking from a fire hose with everything that was there, plus the briefing book. We know it's a lot to take in, and so we have these office hours as a more informal opportunity for all of us to have a conversation, for you to ask questions, to share your ideas. But I do want to reiterate that the main way that we are going to be getting feedback on the alternatives is through the online survey. So that is really the opportunity. We are hearing what you all are saying. At the last meeting, we had, Karen, you were quite vocal in your ideas and your suggestions, which is great, and we're taking those down. The alternatives are an opportunity to have discussions about the future of the city. There is no real decisions made at this point. We are, fully aware that some of the things that are in there are not going to be attractive to some folks in the community, but that doesn't mean it's the final decision. This is the way we heard suggestions to explore different ideas, and so that's what we're doing. So I want everyone to sort of just recognize that as we're starting this process and working in this process. We are recording this meeting. I have I can share my screen and we can go over any of the maps if you want. But essentially what I'd like to do is just, start the conversation. That's how we did it before. There's a small group here. I'd like to recommend that if folks are comfortable, for those of you who don't have your video turned on, I would welcome you to do that so we can all see each other. You can, if you want to speak, you can either use the raise hand feature, or you can just wave. Can't really see me now. Wave and I'll see you and call on you. And we do want to encourage kind of conversation, the discussion among you all as well. How's that sound? Good? Okay, and just really quickly, so we know that, and Karen, I did see your hand up. We know that some folks have been having some challenges with going into the maps and making some comments. Melissa from my staff is here, and she can walk through how to do that if that's if you all want to see it. So just let me know, and it doesn't take long to go through and do that, but we want to make sure people have the opportunity to dive into the maps and make some comments. Okay. All right. Who wants to start? Karen? You're on mute.
Yeah. There we go. First of all, I'm going to apologize in advance. This is the dinner hour, so I'm going to be eating during this meeting.
I would say eat away. Everyone else should feel comfortable doing the same thing. We will not be offended.
Line, maybe. So I thought I would just circle back to a couple of questions I had last week that you weren't prepared to answer, and hoping that maybe you might have the answers at this point. And the first question is, other than this lot, this 36-acre parcel at the end of Alice, are there other lots or other areas within these proposals that are currently strictly residential now, where the proposals are other than low density residential, or is this lot strictly that only area?
We have not had a chance to do that as of yet, but we will do that and get back to you
Okay.
on that. Again, you can flip through the maps if you want to see it sooner. We know it's a little cumbersome to do that.
Yeah, I tried and I
Okay.
just couldn't. And then the second is moving on to my next question of in theoretical build out mode, if based on these various proposals, I think what you told me last week is all three alternatives have the total number of housing units that's about the same. It's just a matter of where they're, you know, are they in this spot or that spot? But my question was, in theoretically, if these were built out to the maximum density that's in these proposals, what's the range of housing units this could create? And actually, what I would really like is to get it down to a level where I could say, you know, in Rancho Caneo on this lot in Newbury Park, you know, alternative one would be, you know, 1,200 units to 1,600 units, and the Thousand Oaks corridor alternative two could be so many units. I mean, I know at some point the city council's not going to vote on these without having some numbers of what this could mean in dreamland. I know these proposals are conceptual, so there's nothing final, but nobody's going to make a decision on these without knowing the range of numbers that could be impacted by this. So I'm just wondering if, since last week, you've had a chance to gather those numbers.
No, we weren't planning on gathering the numbers by sub area. Overall, as I had said, you know, a couple of things. One is the existing general plan allows for 81,184 units of housing. As you all know, there's about 48,000 housing units in the city. That plan was adopted in 1970. We're 51 years later, and we're barely over half built out. So, you know, the planning happens in a very long scale, if at all. And decisions about development are made not by the city, but by individual property owners. And it takes a lot for a property owner to go from a property that is turning a profit, that is making money, even if it's not as much as they could make, into taking a risk and building a new development. So, you know, what we see overall is that there are many communities that have the dream about what they might want to see that never come to fruition, because it is based on the decisions of individual property owners who have to make individual financial decisions. And I think the example of that, you know, is happening right here in the city, which is that there's a lot of opportunity for development and redevelopment of parcels at higher intensity that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in 50 years. So, you know, we need to just, you know, keep that in mind, that's why there's growth projections versus theoretical build out.
Okay, so
all of the alternatives have the same amount of development,
well,
capacity.
Let me step back a question then. If these areas that are in the proposals are not rezoned, what is the actual current capacity within the city for additional build out based on the current zoning?
81,184 units.
So even, okay, that's what the general plan was. And the general plan included things like low density housing that might be 2 to 4 units per acre that ultimately was only built at 2 units per acre. So therefore there's 2 units that have gone in the bank that we're using for that 81,000. Realistically,
it's not the bank. It's essentially a multiplier. It's acres, it's density times acres.
Okay, so you're saying right now, if we do not rezone anything, we have the physical capacity land-wise to build another 35,000 homes in the city of Thousand Oaks, physically?
Correct. Yes.
We have that much vacant land that hasn't been developed.
It's vacant and under density, land that is under full capacity.
Yeah, but under density is include developments that are already in place. Nobody's going to tear down houses that are 2 houses per acre to make them 4 houses per acre.
Someone could do 2 houses on a single lot, or if they could do 4 houses on a single lot, and the current general plan allows that.
I understand that, but if houses are already there, it's not realistic that they're going to be torn down and rebuilt. So I'm trying to get
Um,
at what's not
we
built.
so a couple things. So one is we do see a lot of that, and that's a trend that we're seeing more and more of, is that people are adding onto their houses, doing flag lots, and doing other things, so that you end up having, on a single family home, you end up having 3 to 4 to 6 units, if the density allows it. So we're seeing a lot of that happening, actually.
Like granny flats and things of that nature.
More than that, a granny flat is not a second unit. You can do a subdivision. You know, the state law has changed to allow that to happen. So if you are in an area that is 4.5 to 15 units an acre, and you are on a parcel that has one unit that may be half an acre, you can build 7 units total on that parcel.
Okay.
And the city can't stop you, because
Okay.
state law now says that you can. And so, you know, and there's a couple of things here. So again, this is sort of big picture. So, you know, one is what we did and what we heard was that people don't necessarily want that to happen. They like the single family neighborhoods and don't want multifamily in the single family neighborhoods. So one of the strategies, you know, and while that is a strategy to allow that to happen, one of the strategies that we heard is that that to move some of the development from the areas that are currently single family into other areas, to allow that housing to be built in other areas. You know, the other, which is, hold on a second, Karen.
Yeah, that's fine.
The other is a broader strategy, which is, what is the vision for the community? And there are, you know, we did hear a lot in the process, may not be folks on this call, but we did hear a lot in the process that some areas should transition from commercial non-residential uses, and to allow multifamily housing, to allow a broader diversity of housing types in the city, to bring uses together, to make areas more walkable, to help meet the city's climate goals, because the more you spread out, the more you drive, the more of a climate issue there is, to keep people out of areas that might be high fire hazard areas, and move them into areas that have less fire hazard, you know, in that where there's no. So we heard a lot of things. So it's not just about, you know, where the housing goes. It's also about this broader vision, and that's why I've encouraged people to try to think about the vision rather than the numbers. Because the reality is that when we look at an area, we look at a building, we generally don't know how much density is there. We don't know how many people are there. So what we want to do is we want to encourage you to think about the types of places that you want in the city, and go based on that vision. The numbers will follow. Again, I would bet that in the next 50 years, there is absolutely no way the city is going to reach 100% capacity.
No,
Never seen it happen in a city.
I would agree with that. Would we actually, in the areas that are determined to be not changed, would we actually downzone some of these areas to keep the 81,000 as a net zero? I mean, if we put,
yes,
if we increase in these 4 areas, and we don't change the other areas, then our general plan could now be 100,000 homes.
That's right.
Units.
That's right. So it's a combination. And we explained that some of the areas we're going to downzone those areas, so that you can't do the 15 units an acre in an area that's where it's currently 4.5 units an acre single family homes, and move some of that density to the corridors and these other areas that we identified. Now, it may not be the number that we're talking about. There may be more capacity. We may, you know, people may give suggestions to have some areas that are, you know, that can transition to multifamily and fourplex that are single family now. And I think that's part of the conversation. And I think that, you know, that's all part of this conversation that we're having.
And I guess I still would like to end my question with, I understand it's conceptual, and I understand that the ultimate of, you know, when you issue ranges of density, that what the developer decides to do is very much in question, and ultimately what the city approves is in question, because they're not going to deal with the infrastructure issues until the development is actually put before them for approval. But I think, in all due respect, I would still like to see the numbers. I would like to see, based on what these ultimate proposals are, the range could be as low as X number of units to as maximum as, because I can't believe a city council member is going to vote on something and not see what the ultimate
Well,
range could
that's
possibly be.
that's a separate question about what council will do that none of us here are on the council and can answer. But certainly, you know, let me look and see what information we can provide. Again, what
Maybe by
the
next
challenge,
week,
and I'll be completely honest. The challenge is once you start looking just at the numbers, people lose what the vision is. So the idea is we want people to focus on the vision and what they want to see and the type of place that they want to create, rather than, you know, is this 1,200 units or 1,300 units? So again, that's what we would really encourage.
Yeah, but I think for those of us in the immediate neighborhoods, that vision, that is more than just the vision. That's a very impactful number that we can't really give our feedback on without having that. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay,
further.
Paul, I saw your hand up. Paul, are you there? You're on mute. There you go. Now you're off mute.
Spacebar works in the other meetings and it didn't work here.
That's okay.
So just one clarification from that last conversation. What I got out of that is that the 81,000 units is staying 81,000 units, that the overall build out is not changing. Is that right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. So the other one is the overall general plan. I don't know. I don't understand whether it's something that says once something gets approved in the general plan, does that mean that we basically can't stop it? And as an example, we had something recently where I read in the paper, I don't know the details, but that we had a choice between allowing a 50-foot building or cutting down 4 oak trees. And I was going, how did we get ourselves in a situation like that? So in the general plan, if we have a situation where wants to build in an area that's zoned to allow a 60-foot building, and they meet all of the other requirements, do we have to allow them to build at 60 feet?
Yes. Now, there are other regulations that are in place. If if there's a flood zone, if there are regulations about trees, if there are, then that impacts the capacity and that impacts the size of the building. But what we find is that there are other regulations in place, typically, that can impact the size and scale of a development. Right. If there's topography, lots of different things, but the size of the lot impacts things. So
I understand that. I understand that. My question is really, if we go to allowing these maximums, whatever it is, have we locked ourselves into in the future not being able to say no to somebody because technology didn't stop it, and all of the other things you talked about didn't stop it? And we'd maybe prefer to have a 30-foot building in that area. But if it's approved in the general plan, do we have to say, well, yeah, we're stuck now, you have to get to build 60?
Well, yes, you should think, we need to think carefully now about where there is more intensity and where there isn't. And that's part of this process. We also have to recognize that there are needs in the city that need to be met. It's important that the city evolve. We've heard that a lot in the process. And the question is, how can that evolution happen to make sure that there is responsible evolution that doesn't change the overall quality of life in the community? And again, it's a really small, like as we had mentioned earlier, the area that we're even looking at, what we're calling, quote, areas of change, is less than 8% of the city. Of that, a large percentage is existing residential neighborhoods that we don't foresee much change in, and also potentially commercial uses. Rancho Conejo. So it's actually, the percentage is getting smaller and smaller. And what I'd really encourage folks to do is to think about, where are the areas that could have an evolution to be something that is a little different than it is today, that also enables something to happen. Because we heard a lot of folks who said that we want to be able to have affordable housing in the community. We want a diversity of housing types. Doesn't necessarily mean, 120-foot buildings, but if it's 3-story buildings are actually very difficult to build, and most people don't build them. So essentially, if the number is too low, you're not going to be able to achieve these other things you might want to achieve.
Right. I just wanted to understand whether we're basically locking ourselves into what some of us would consider a worst case and not be able to say no, as opposed to, all right, well, if the situation warrants it, then we can allow them to go to that higher level or higher density or whatever the issue is.
Okay, Roseanne? Actually, hold on, Roseanne. Phil had his hand up previously, so let's go to Phil and then to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Good evening. This is my first time to the meeting. I did
Welcome.
look at your meeting online from the 2nd and read your booklet, your 50-page booklet. I have a few questions. I live in Casa Conejo, in the area, in the development behind the field, south of the 101 and west of Orchard that Karen was speaking about earlier. My understanding is that that's currently zoned R1. I've lived here for 15 years. When I moved in, we were told that it was zoned R1 and that we could only expect single-family dwellings to be built there in the future. This seems like a pretty big change from R1 to filling that area up with mixed-use structures, multi-level structures. What is the first of all, what is the process for changing from R1 to a zoning thing like that? Second of all, if citizens here are concerned about that change, what steps exactly can we take to bring it to your attention so that it'll be addressed appropriately and taken seriously? Thank you.
Good. Yeah, thanks. So I will say that parcel has come up quite a bit in conversation, and so the process of commenting is you comment in the briefing book. You can comment in the briefing book, and you can fill out the survey. We have, I said this previously, we have heard lots of comments about this, so it's absolutely already on our radar to think about how that parcel could have maybe a more refined vision than just one color on it. Right now, it's one parcel, so one color was put on it. But we've certainly heard a lot of comments from folks already about maybe rethinking part of the vision for part of that site, so that there's transition, so that it's maybe not all mixed use. I'll say right away, we have heard you so far, so it's on the radar. It's on our radar, and I would encourage you to encourage folks to fill out the survey, because that's the primary method of communicating the information. In the survey, you'll see for that general area, you can write in another recommendation for what you would want to see. So, again, this goes for every parcel in the city. We don't claim to have gotten every parcel right and that meets the vision for everyone. And so we would just encourage folks to share your ideas on any parcel in the city that you have a different recommendation for.
If we are, very seriously concerned about changing, because it seems like to me it should be a big process to change from one zoning label, an R1, to another one. Seems like a really big deal to me. Like up in Dos Vientos, if they wanted to do it, they would probably have, big meetings about it. So it seems to me like we should be able to do something like submit a petition or something to the city council and say, hey, wait a minute, stop. We don't like this idea.
You are welcome to you are welcome to communicate whatever you would like to the council. We have a 2-year process here for thinking about land uses in the city. That is the beginning. It's the vision. It's the high level. And so, it's not that this is not a this is a long process that we have been on. I hear you say that this is the first time you've been involved, and we're glad you're here and we're glad you're talking. But this is part of that process. It is that first step in the process. So sharing your feelings now and your thoughts is absolutely appropriate. And we encourage you to do that. We encourage everyone to do that for all of this. That's why we're here.
I guess I have another question. All right. So I just found out about this last weekend, and it sounds like looking at the materials that a vote is going to be taken maybe in March or April. Is that when things get locked down, or is this going to go on for several years in the conceptualization stage before a vote is
no, it's getting
put on the
it's
three
getting
plans?
locked. It's getting the preliminary plan is going to be identified in April, May. There can be some refinements over time, but by a year from now is when the plan will be adopted. Again, we've been going at this for a year and a half. And there's been a lot of press about it. We've had a lot of meetings about it. We're glad you're here now. It's never too late. You can always make changes. You can always recommend things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And again, we really do encourage, comments from all of your neighbors. So, have them jump in to the conversation. And I will just say, Roseanne, you're up next. But I will say we have, Karen talked a lot about it. We've received comments about this, so it's absolutely on the radar for us. Okay, Roseanne.
So to reiterate what Phil said, I have been involved in this process since about this time last year when the GPAC meeting started. And I know that the vast majority of people I know, including the president of my homeowners association, are very thin on details about what is going on. So even though the staff and the consultants say that this has been a long-standing process with a lot of outreach, I think a vast majority of the community does not feel like they were made aware of what was going on. That's just to preface and speak up for Phil and whoever else is feeling like this is all very new to them, because I have been reaching out to my friends and colleagues, and a lot of people don't know what's going on. People's lives are really, really busy. And a lot of people, most people don't pay attention to what's going on in the city because their lives are busy and because up until a year ago, there wasn't really major change that I think people felt like they needed to pay attention to. So just a heads up that even though you feel like your engagement process has been very exhaustive, a lot of people in the community don't feel that way. But that's not actually what I wanted to talk about. You keep mentioning that only 8% of the community is going to undergo any change, and so that it's really a very small amount of space that's impacted. However, those small areas of change are significantly being impacted, which is why I think a lot of people are somewhat distressed about what they're seeing and feel like they would like more time than just a month from the time that the maps are released to the time where a decision is going to be made, because we have thousands of parcels that we're supposed to be able to look at in the space of a very short time. But my question—
I'll tell you, we're talking internally about if there are ways to, we're on a deadline for the housing element.
I understand.
And so what we're talking internally about, if there's ways to extend the process, we're working with our team members to see how that can happen, so we can still stay on schedule and not suffer the wrath of the state and have the city get into trouble for other things. So we hear you on that. That's another thing that we've heard and we're thinking about as well. I'm glad you brought it up so that we could tell you we're thinking about it.
Okay. And my questions were specifically, Phil asked a question about once the general plan is T's are crossed and I's are dotted and everything, and a development comes up, what options do we have if something is proposed that we don't like, that actually meets all the requirements of the general plan. And you talked about the need for, or the fact that a lot of people would like to see affordable housing. I'm one of them. I'm also concerned, as you well know, about sustainability features in our buildings that are coming up. So my question is, how do we make sure that those provisions which put limitations on what can be built are actually incorporated in the general plan? What is the process for doing that?
Well, there's two things. That's a really good question. So there's two things. So one is that the general plan is the guiding document in the city, but it doesn't identify every single answer. And so that's what zoning does. So zoning follows the general plan, and any modification, any creation of new zoning districts needs to be reflected in the zoning as well, because the zoning identifies things like building setbacks, open space requirements, landscape requirements, parking requirements, and lots of other aspects that actually make a building nice rather than a big box, which is ultimately what we want. Is if you're going to build something, you want it to contribute to the community, you want it to be nice looking, rather than something that's an ugly monolith, because we know we've seen plenty of those built over the last few generations. So a lot of that happens in zoning, but we want to set the policy for that in the general plan. The question is, can you stop? If there's a project that you're like, yeah, we just don't like this, and it's a housing project, you can't. The state has in the law SB 330, which I had mentioned in the presentation, the state has identified the requirement for objective design standards. So we have to have very clear standards that if those standards are met, you can build the project. It doesn't mean the city doesn't have a say. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to go through design review, but the city can't just categorically say, nah, I don't like it, even though it meets everything about zoning. We just don't like it. Too bad. That used to happen. And that is one of the leading, the stopping projects that were allowed in zoning is one of the reasons we're 2 to 3 million housing units short in this state. And so that is one of the problems.
My intention was not necessarily to stop a project. My intention is to preemptively clarify what kinds of standards we want to see in our projects. And you mentioned that that's done through housing. However, I still don't understand how we have community input into that zoning process.
The zoning process is going to follow on to the general plan, and there will be community input into that process after. We just don't make every decision now in the general plan. So there is a separate process that will happen after that the city or someone else will lead. So
then, as a resident who wants to see like sustainability measures included in buildings, and the zoning is following after the general plan process, but the two have to be coordinating and complementary. How do we?
Well, the general plan sets the policy. So if the concern is having sustainability measures in the general plan, sustainability requirements as part of buildings, then we can put as a broad policy that that's what should happen. That can go into the general plan, and then zoning implements that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is one of the challenges where we would love to be able to answer every single make every single decision now in the general plan, but what we found that is plans that try to do that take 8 to 15 years to complete and cost a lot more money. So we end up breaking them up into different processes.
So what if, when you get into the zoning process, you find that there's something that's very important to the residents that wasn't adequately detailed in the general plan? Do you then go back and amend the general plan to allow for that?
That's possible. Absolutely. Absolutely. The general plan can be, and that's a common process. Again, we have to operate at one level of detail for the general plan. There's a lot of give and take, so that once you sort of dive in to the specifics of the zoning, you sometimes realize that maybe we needed more clarity, or maybe this wasn't actually the land use designation that we should have in this area, or we needed to be more refined. And there's a process that you can do of updating the general plan in order to reflect that.
So you're not talking about tweaks, you're talking about actual amendments, and what?
Yeah, I mean, the general plan can be amended up to 4 times per year. And
right,
so
I understand that, but I mean, I assumed that would be the case because was the case with the county's general plan.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking more in terms of before the plan is actually voted on, and you realize, I'm assuming you're doing the zoning before the general plan is voted on, or do you not?
No, after.
Okay, so realistically then, if you realize that you've got an inconsistency between the zoning you want and the general plan policies that have been set, it would require an amendment, not just a simple tweak that of something that was realized in the process of developing the general plan.
Yeah, so again, this is where there's some back and forth. So the general plan has the broad vision, the broad policies, the land use designations, which have density requirements and use requirements. The general plan, I mean, the zoning after the general plan is adopted, within a period of time, the city needs to update its zoning code, and it updates its zoning code to be consistent with the general plan, to implement the general plan. However, when you're updating the zoning after the general plan is adopted, it is quite often that you get in and you're in the details and you realize that there might need to be tweaks to the general plan to better reflect the vision of the community. And so at that point is when you would go back and do an amendment to the general plan. So that the general plan, the zoning implements the general plan, but it doesn't mean that just because it's in the general plan, you have to do exactly that in zoning. If you realize that as you're doing zoning, you need to make changes to the general plan, you can still do that. You can always make changes to the general plan.
I'm just going to jump in because it's going on with Roseanne's question. So can you explain again, like, what's the difference between when the general plan is voted on and the actual zoning itself takes place? What's the time lag between that usually?
It depends on the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions, I don't know what the city's plan is at this point, and I think the city's probably focused right now on getting into the general plan process, getting into that through that, and then it will start in on the zoning. So it will be after, and it's not weeks, it's months, years for that. So Ian, Michael, do you want to?
That we have to report back to the state then.
That's general plan.
Okay, so that's the October. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm good for now. Thank you.
So, thanks, Roseanne. Are there do other folks have questions? Rory, I see you waving.
Maybe a little Johnny come lately. I was going to alert you that all 3 alternatives do show mixed use development on what used to be called the Borchard wetlands. It's not actually a wetlands according to the Army Corps of Engineers, but it does have a Ventura County flood control flood easement over at least part of it. I just think there will be a lot of concern in even at existing zoning. I think it could take over 100, maybe 180 units, which would have elicited a real outcry from a lot of folks. So going beyond that may be a little more controversial, but we shall see. But in general, I do like the Rancho Conejo plan, both in alternatives 1, 2, and 3, except for that one spot. Then I had another question. I think I had asked it at the last GPAC meeting, but like a little more clarification about identifying public park space if we're concentrating more development in certain nodes. And I think you indicated you couldn't really do that without creating an inverse condemnation. But the existing general plan, I think, shows proposed park sites, or at least it did. So,
I can't speak to what happened in 1970.
Okay.
in terms of what California law allowed and didn't allow when this was done. But, what can be done, and I think what we will do is sort of a conceptual parks and open space plan where we have the existing parks and then identify broad locations where new parks could be needed in order
That would
to
be
serve.
good. And then
Yeah.
the next question is, I assume the Quimby Act is still in place.
Yep.
Assuming we have these new developments, would they all have to contribute to Quimby fees to the park district?
So there's, Michael, Ian, maybe you guys can jump in here. Do you have just Quimby or do you have a park impact fee? I think you have a park impact fee, right?
Yes, we have a park impact fee that goes to the Parks District. They refer to it as a Quimby fee, but it's really a full parks fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there would be some offset at least for the park district, whether to improve existing facilities, or I think it would be difficult to buy new land if it's got a high use designation on it, but just want to make sure we
Well,
had.
what's interesting is these larger parcels, and there are some of them in the community, in the city right now, actually are that opportunity to provide park space, additional park space. So if you look on the, I know there's some on the getting my directions here, on the east side of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, there's the commercial properties. Those are some very large parcels there. If those were redeveloped with another use, there's certainly an opportunity, I think, to build new park space into that. The same thing goes for the the Oaks Mall. That's a very large parcel. That whole thing should never be built as just development on the whole thing without open space. Same thing with the flood zone. What do you call the parcel in Rancho Conejo, Newberry Park?
AKA Orchard Wetlands, but the
Okay.
owners would really object to that term.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but there's another opportunity at such a large parcel to actually have a park there. And I think that in those larger ones, I think it's perfectly appropriate that we can add through policy that those are opportunities, if they are redeveloped, to include some park space and not just pay for parks. So, and that's something that I think we can do in the general plan. It's hard. What we can't do is say, hey, this kind of strip commercial development would be a great place for a new park. Let's put a park designation on that, because then they have no value to their property. We can't do that.
Got it.
So.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see. So Karen, I see your hand up. Roseanne, I see your hand up, but Tim, I'm going to call on you. You haven't, and then Gary, you're here, you're waving too. Let's go Tim to Gary. I want to make sure we're spreading around folks who get a chance to talk.
All right. Hey, thanks for picking me. Sadly, I woke up at 3 this morning and I watched last week's meeting where I saw you, Karen. So I feel like I've been with Karen a long time this week. I
was up at 3:30. I feel your pain.
Yeah. I didn't want to be. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I was thinking about this. I'm like, oh, this is not good. But I have a few different subjects. I'm just going to pick the first one here. I'm probably going to change subjects just a little bit. In some of your, first of all, I think you guys are doing a really good job with your program, Matt, and Kristen's been emailing me, and Melissa, you guys are doing a great job. I know how hard it is from a development standpoint to start with something at a 30,000 foot view, and we all want to get down to 0 feet, and you're at 30,000 foot view, but you guys are doing a really good job in keeping calm and explaining things. So I appreciate it. I saw a lot about density bonus, and I wasn't sure what that means. Is that we get money if we do density bonus, or if something's made for 15 units per acre and there's a density bonus option and we can get to 30 units, do we save money? Does it, what value is that would add more units on if we didn't have to? So that's my first question. And then I'll just go because I know the other hands are going to go quick. In 2014 to 2021, the RENA plan, there was 192 dwellings as part of that. And I understand there's 2,100 and something as part of this program for the next 8 years. I was wondering, did the city use all 192? Do we make 192? And if we did, what was the mix of very low, low, moderate, and high income of those units? And then if you can explain the difference between income levels of those, like which one is Section 8? And if, what's low, what's affordable housing versus housing that's affordable? And then has anything been done to understand if these are supposed to mix together? So am I supposed to have very low in with low and moderate and high income all in the same building? And then is there any crime crime research that's been done to tell whether or not those people all can cohabitate the same building with, without killing each other? So there you go.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the last one.
Okay.
There is not a relationship between crime and density in the way that you're talking about. A lot of these units are built not as standalone affordable, but where a percentage of the project has an affordable component. Now, if you look at the numbers, and I can open it up on my screen, but when we're saying low, it's actually 80% of median income. I mean, you're talking teachers, you're talking firemen, you're talking people who are like doing yard work. This is not like, I really want to encourage people to not have this perception that density equals crime, because and that affordable, and these are capital A affordable units, that it's a bad element coming into the community. I mean, these are, if you talk to the people who work a lot of the people who work in the city, in the jobs that are working in the stores, the teachers, they can't afford to live in the community. That's what this housing is for. And so I just want people to encourage.
I didn't think density meant crime. So my crime part was more because I know that in Ventura, there's a lot of housing authorities with a lot of Section 8 there, and crime is high, and there's a lot of vagrancy, and it looks terrible. Yeah. And if I'm at the, let's just say moderate high, and I make, I don't know, 100,000 a year, and someone's 30,000 and getting subsidized, I might have more expectation of how my place should be treated than somebody who isn't coming out of pocket with what I consider as much money. So that's the only reason why I said I don't think that teachers and police or 80% of median, which is still lots of money, is going to cause the crime. I just think if there's a very low level and it's combined with teachers and police, maybe not police, but teachers and other people, that might be a mixed use problem.
No, actually, quite the opposite it happens, actually, which is that what you're talking about, and this is a legacy of really poor planning decisions, is that pockets of low income housing were built, and they were all in one group and segregated. And what that does is that creates cycles of poverty and cycles of crime. And we've learned our lesson in the planning field, and we want to integrate people together from income levels. And that produces the best results, because it's when you concentrate, that's when you get the problem. So actually the mixing is far better, because if you just put all people who are, don't have jobs or, in one area, like there's going to be issues, but that's not the point. Like, we don't want to do that. So mixing is absolutely better. I'm going to try and work backwards here with some of these questions. And Ian, I know you want to jump in for this. Do you want to go now and just answer some of the questions? I see you are unmuted.
Yeah.
And I'll drink some water. Talking too much.
Yeah.
And by the way, Tim, I'm sorry, before you, Tim, you hit a nerve. Like, you guys, I'm human too, right? So like the whole question of income and density and who can afford is something I'm really passionate about, that I believe everyone should have an opportunity to, that housing, good quality housing is not something that is just for some people. It should be for everybody. And so I wanted to make sure I got that point across. So you hit a nerve. I'm sorry if I jumped on you for that.
I'm taking back my compliment. Compliment is gone.
All right.
Yep. And Karen, I need some of that wine that you're drinking there.
Whoa. Refill.
Wow. That's a pour.
That's a heavy
it's
pour.
It's a tough meeting. Okay,
All
Ian,
right.
go ahead.
Well, yeah. With that being said, I mean, in that vein about the affordable housing and having it interspersed, I mean, having a robust like inclusionary housing ordinance. So basically as development occurs, those units are incorporated into development so that they are scattered throughout the city. And I'll just say that currently the inclusionary housing in the ordinance we have with the city does not have very much teeth. So developers are not necessarily obligated to provide affordable housing. And that's been a pattern here in Thousand Oaks. And it basically is very characteristic in how our housing is produced. So back to your question as far as the RHNA numbers, and let me just kind of clarify a couple things. So the last cycle, 2014 to 2021, it's the 5th housing cycle. The RHNA had 192 units, so you're right about that, but actually there were 63 that were carried over from the previous 8-year cycle. So there's a grand total of 255 was what we were required to do. And that was divided up into the 4 different income categories, that 255. You had 84 that had to be in the very low income, 58 in low, 36 in the moderate income, and 77 in the above moderate. And every year we have to report to the state Office of Planning and Research and Housing and Community Development. And that's a requirement as far as keeping our housing element up and certified. And I just actually ended up crunching the numbers because every year we go to the council to basically show them where we're at in producing units. So we've only, over the past 8 years, there's been 705 units. So that's well above the 255. However, we have only met 48% of our RHNA because the very low income categories, this year we actually built 11, but there's only 37% that were provided. Only 2 low income units have been built in the last 8 years. At 136 moderate, so that's 378% of the requirement, if you want to play with numbers.
Sure.
And then you have 536 at the above moderate. So almost 700% more. So basically it's very market driven and there's no teeth as far as getting that balance of affordability into the project. So I think that kind of answers your question as far as where that, so I mean, all of these are being built by private development and so forth, so.
Yeah, I know.
Most housing is most affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, because I have 2 kids, one's 28 and one's 23, and they moved to Simi Valley so they can afford to rent a place out there. But there's no parking. Right? There's so many people that live there. Everybody's got 2 cars, and it's 1.5 spaces per, or 1 space per is a half a guest. And, they have to park a half a mile away in a parking mall to walk up unless they get home by 4:45. So, when I'm looking at the density, and that doesn't mean, I know in a lot of your land uses, I was looking specifically for high use density or medium versus low. And anywhere that, at least in my interpretation, I saw high density, I thought, okay, well, there's going to be traffic and parking issues with anywhere around it, because we already have traffic issues, especially as you get anywhere north of the 23, it backs up already. So anything developed that way is just going to add to that problem, because I don't think it's going to get wider.
And you're talking about the freeway traffic.
Well, there's also inner city, to go across town with the traffic lights, it takes 20 minutes to go 5 miles.
So I was going to say maybe there's other folks, and we've done a couple of deep dives. Gary, I know you had a question as well. Tim, did I miss any of your questions?
No. I'm just messing with you, Matt.
If I can.
Don't do that. I'm sensitive.
That's all right.
But if I can jump in just quickly. One thing to think about in terms of density, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, but it's not being talked about, is the overcrowding. I mean, it's the lack of supply of housing. So you have these housing developments that are built. Sure, they're denser than what we're used to seeing. However, because of the cost of rent and the number of people that need to cover that rent, you're ending up into an overcrowding situation, even in newer developments. So that's why there's this perception that density equates to parking problems and traffic. I mean, so, part of the goal is what we're trying to do is getting a balance of, broader range of housing. So the crowding is reduced.
And Tim, think about if there's anything, if we missed any of your questions, you want to follow up, let us know. But let's move to Gary.
Hi, thank you. My first time sitting in, but anyway, I was looking at the article in the Acorn, and it just said that TEO has to make room for an additional 2,600 residential units to cover the 21 to 29. Now, they're going to go on the market and be sold theoretically, but what happens if we don't hit that? Because we haven't hit numbers that were allocated for a long time in terms of selling. So what happens to that 2,600? Let's say we only can sell 1,000 of that. What happens to that other balance of units as far as the state and our hitting our targets?
Okay, so I'll start answering. So there is a little bit of a misconception of what's going on. So let me see if I can clarify. Yeah. So what the state says is not that the city needs to build 2,600 new housing units in this time period. What the state is saying is that you need to provide the space for private developers to be able to build that number of units. Okay, so there's no guarantee that it's going to happen. And in fact, many times, jurisdictions do not meet the housing numbers that are identified through the RHNA process. And that's what Ian was talking about. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but a lot of times it is essentially not a requirement to build. It is a requirement to provide enough space so that the market can build the housing that's needed. Okay. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
it may be that only 1,000 units are built.
It just sounds like it's a circle that's never going to close.
In what way?
Well, if you're going to say you have to have that many units, but you don't have a program that allows that number of units to theoretically be built so they could be marketed, it's an exercise in making people happy with numbers, but not housing.
It's a capacity question. I mean, but what Gary, what you're hitting on is absolutely correct, which is that even if we all create a plan that has a capacity, it still requires people to come in and build. And we can't force someone to sell their property. And to someone else who wants to build, we can't force someone to build their property. The state does not have the city does not have redevelopment authority. The state doesn't have that anymore. So it really is up to the decisions of individuals about what they want to do with their property. And what we found is that even where the parcels are way under what their potential maximum is, they don't get redeveloped, because if someone has a shopping center and they've had the shopping center in the family for years and they're bringing in lots of money or enough money to be able to retire and live off of that, why would they redevelop? And so that's the challenge.
Well, it sounds like they ought to start looking at some of the economic impact of making these things happen rather than just here's the numbers, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, that's a challenge. Now there is a piece, and Ian, I don't know if you want to talk about this, of carryover from one year to the next if units aren't built. This is where we get into a lot of really specific housing policy. So Ian, if you want to just touch on it quickly.
Well,
or not.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry,
the carryover of what we don't meet, well, I think it's more of a factor of if we don't get the housing element certified in time, then that gets added onto your RHNA. So that's in addition to the 2,615 units that are for this upcoming cycle. So that's all I really have to say about that. But again, that the 2,600 unit, that's for sale and for rent units. So it's not, how are these units going to be marketed and sold?
And as you all know, the city can't identify that this is a rental or this is a for sale unit. The city can just say that it's a unit and allow a unit to be built. Okay, so let's see.
I think Silvana had her hand up next.
Oh,
if we're going
great,
to,
thank you. Thanks, Silvana.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi. I have, so I wanted to pull back away from some of the details. You were saying that you think that we need to think of the vision rather than the details. So how do you propose then, when I look at these maps, how do I do I just put a general pin in the whole map, just one pin that says just a vision that I have, or do I go to all the different areas and make the same vision? Like, how do you propose we interact with the map in a proper way?
That's a really good question. So I'm sure you all have great ideas for different areas of the city, things that no one has mentioned before in the process. So I think that what you should do is put a pin and describe the area that you're talking about. And I would also say that if you feel like that you need to print out a map and draw on it and send it off, you can email that to the city. So we'll get that as well. Melissa, and I can't remember this, I apologize. Do we have polygons as a drawing tool on there, or is it just pins?
That's a good question. Let me double check.
Just pins.
It's just pins?
Yes.
We can double check, but I'm pretty sure it's just pins.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say put a pin in it, describe what it is, or print the map out, like print a page of the book and write it, scan it, and send it through the email to the city, and we'll get that and we'll look at that as well. So yeah, we'd really encourage you, if you have ideas, if you've seen something in another community, you're like, wow, this would look great here, whatever it is, tell us what it is. We always love seeing other examples. Is there anything particular that you want to share with the group?
Well, for instance, I would like to not have very high buildings. And so I would want to say something like the height limit should be, for instance, 50 stories, but including...
Wait.
I know.
Not 50 stories, right? I just want to be clear. Because that was never in there. But if you want to propose that, I guess it could be considered.
Sorry about that.
Okay, we can all laugh.
Just throughout the whole city, I would rather not have, taller than 50 feet. I don't want to go to each section and put that. I feel like that would be spamming your map.
Yeah. Yeah, no, actually, thank you. I would just, a lot of the options, go to, 50 feet in a lot of them, so you can identify those if that's your preference in a lot of places. I will say that we thought carefully about the difference, and I haven't talked about this, so if you can indulge me for a second, we thought a lot about the 50-foot height limit and the difference between 50 feet and 58 feet and what that would produce. And the reason that, you can still do a mixed-use 4-story building or a residential building, a standalone residential building in 50 feet. What you get with 58 feet is you get the ability to have a better ground floor, so you can have better retail space on the ground floor, and then you get the opportunity for variation in height, in the height of the building, so that you don't actually just have a big box. And so that was why that shift to 58 feet happened to the mixed use, from mixed use low to mixed use medium. And it was to actually, what we think as professionals, to actually be able to enable you all to have better buildings and more variety rather than boxes. So, you can do with that what you will. You can have your, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying the opinion's wrong. I'm just saying, like, that's what we did, and that's what we thought about with that. That if you do 4 stories in 50 feet, you can do it. If you do 4 stories in 58 feet, you get the options of a much better building.
Yeah, I know that the height is averaged. So if you say 58 is the maximum, that's the average height. So you could actually have areas that are quite higher.
Yeah, that's something That is something we actually talked, we did talk internally, and I think we still need to discuss it. It is more of a zoning question, but it is something that can be in the general plan, which is that, could we, are there changes to the definitions of things that would still allow for those better buildings and not, because I hear your point of view, which is if it's 58 feet average, you could have, 75 or 80 feet in one spot and, much lower in another, right, to get to that average. And I certainly, would share the concern about that wide variation with that. So, there might be, I think there are ways that we could get around that to have variation, but not extreme variation. Which is maybe what you're concerned about mostly.
Yeah.
So.
And then I'll just mention too, and Silvana, I'm sure you've already taken the survey, but for other folks who haven't, we have a survey open right now that asks a lot of these specific questions and also leaves room for you to fill in comments, not just related to each of the areas we're talking about, but overall citywide. So I'm going to send a link out now, and if you haven't, please take the survey. That is our primary source of collecting feedback in addition to meetings like this tonight.
And everyone, this is Melissa, if you haven't met her, who's with Ray Mead Associates and also born and raised in Thousand Oaks.
Yeah, so my family's been in the city for almost 50 years and I lived there myself for 20. So love TO.
Okay. Let's see. So is anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak, Karen? I'm going to come back to you, and Roseanne, I see your hands up. I'm not ignoring. I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak here. Is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to weigh in, to ask questions, to share their ideas that you would like to do that? Or if you're just here to listen, that's perfectly fine too. Okay, actually, before we do that, Mary, did you get information on how to put pins on maps and how to use the maps?
No.
Okay, so if we can do that, maybe if you would like to do that, we can, if you want to take a minute now with Melissa, you guys can go off into, unless other people want to see it, but you can go off into a breakout room and she can walk you through how to do that and help out with that.
It's okay. I don't think that's going to be a good use of my time. My biggest concern with this entire process is how few of us have been involved. I see 20 people on here tonight. That just amazes me. Aside from the folks who have jobs and joined us. So I wish that there were more people involved and more voices in this process. I really do. And so I will go to the survey. I'll go to the Survey Monkey and, the idea to me, when I hear you say, oh, let's put a park on that land that's underwater whenever it rains, that's up beside the freeway, please don't let's put any parks up against the freeway again. I mean, that is not the kind of place that we want our kids playing right next to the freeway. And I guess that's my biggest concern, is that all of this proposed, the 1, 2, and 3 plans are along the 101.
Yeah, I mean, again, that was what evolved through the process that we went through. But, and it's, some of it is much further away, some of it is right against it. But, from an air quality perspective, yeah, there are definitely concerns about about air quality flowing off of the freeway from a public health perspective.
And if I can just respond to the comment about wanting more folks to be involved, we totally agree with you. We wish that every single resident in the city would participate in our meetings, but I do want to share that we had over 400 folks register for our meeting that was 2 weeks ago, which was fantastic. And of the folks that did attend the meeting, nearly 50%, that was the first time they'd been involved. So they were kind of newcomers to the process, which it is halfway through, but we were still so excited to have all those new faces join us and get that exposure about the plan. In the last year and a half, I think we've had several hundred, if not thousands, different folks engage in the process. We've done thousands. Yeah, we've done stakeholder interviews. with different business groups throughout the community. We've met with high school students, we've met with Spanish speakers, we've had pop-up workshops at the farmers market, the Oaks Mall. I can't even think of all the other places, but there were several. We've done 2 community-wide workshops, and we're always looking up, and 12 GPAC meetings or 11 GPAC meetings where we've had, in addition to our 22-person GPAC, we've had upwards of 20 or 30 members of the community join us. But we're always looking for other ways to reach out.
You know?
Yeah, and we're so happy that you've been involved. And if you have any other suggestions for us about how we can better reach members of the community, we would love that feedback, and we'd really appreciate it.
Melissa,
so thanks for sharing.
Question: Was there anything done differently to get the word out? Because I guess that's where my frustration comes, is just even knowing about this. I've lived in the area for about 5 years. And, you know, you kind of talk to neighbors here and there about the area and the land, and then you see it flood, and then, you know, there's all these kind of little ideas or theories, but no one really knows. And, you know, I didn't really know any of this was going down until I got a flyer left on my door, and I was very grateful. I'm just assuming maybe a neighbor notified us. So I was just curious how you may have gotten the word out in the past when you had a lot of participation compared to maybe now, and what sort of obligation the city has to getting that out. So that's my first question. My second one is this city-owned land, the Borchard Wetlands, or is that privately owned land?
It's privately owned.
Yeah, to respond.
Actually, Kristen, you've been doing a lot of the tracking of some of the engagement. You know, I want to make sure, just to be clear, I want to make sure we're answering some technical questions. I think we can answer this about how we've engaged over the last year and a half, but I want to make sure we're getting to the map technical questions as well. Kristen, you want to jump in?
I mean, Melissa covered a lot of it. I think some of the things that we're trying to do that we go above and beyond that you would normally see the city do. We've taken out full page, half page ads in Acorn, the VP Star. We've had ads running for the last 2 months in the Acorn, with the exception of the one that they forgot to post. So they did all of their social media for us. We've started our own Instagram, Twitter accounts, TikTok account for the kids. Let's see, we sent out flyers through all the water bills. There's 33,000 plus of those we've sent out. I have personally emailed all of the homeowners associations in the city. Unfortunately, the problem with that is if your homeowners association, if your managers do not forward that information on to you, it makes it hard for me to get to you. It also depends on if your homeowners associations don't update the city and let us know if you have a president who's changed, you know, and has a different contact information. Hopefully I'm not sending this out into unupdated information. What else have we done differently? Normally for city projects, the city would only, let's say if it was a development project, they would only notify people within a couple 100 feet. And that's about it. So you probably don't hear about a lot of information, but we're really just trying to come up with any sort of outreach we can possibly do. We've hand delivered packets to all the homebound communities. I've delivered flyers to apartment complexes in the city, begging apartment managers to pass them around. I'm legally not allowed to do cold calls, and I'm also not allowed to drop off flyers. I can only bring them to management offices. I'm just kind of throwing off this stuff off the top of my head right now, so I'm sure I'm going to miss some things, but
yeah, I mean, again, I just, you know, if a couple of things. So one is the city and the team have done a tremendous amount to inform people. We can't force people to engage, but what we've tried to do is inform people about the process. Can we do better? We can always do better in all of this. We all know that we always want more people to participate. It creates a more robust conversation about this. And this is really, it can be a really exciting process for folks. And it's very important. So And then lastly, since you all are here, if you haven't been here, please forward the information to your friends, to your neighbors. Make sure they know about this. It's not too late, and certainly it's not too late to continue to engage in the community process with the city, because ultimately that is a lot of what this is about, is actually building capacity in the city to engage in civic discourse in the future. So Chris, we're glad you're here, even if you haven't been here before. Very glad you're here. All of you, so great. Okay, so let's see. Karen, Roseanne, Phil.
Okay.
In that order.
Thank you. Chris, I will answer your question. I won't call the person out, but the person that owns that lot in Borchard and Newbury Park is actually on this call. So I actually had a couple of questions. First of all, this is kind of off the grid here, but when you talk about notifying people, and maybe this is a really weird question to ask, I'm correct in understanding we cannot put flyers in people's mailboxes as private citizens, correct?
I can't. I don't know the legalities of whether you can or not.
I'm seeing some head.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that might be solicited.
I think it's a federal issue, but I didn't know if it was because
Yeah.
city
I'm pretty
issue.
sure it's a federal issue that you can't put anything in somebody's mailbox.
Yeah.
Okay. But now my main question is going back to Senate Bill 330 and the requirement that cities cannot object to plans and proposals without objective standards. Are those objective standards determined during the zoning? For instance, I heard somebody mention things like parking issues. Should not parking be part of those objective standards, that there needs to be 2 parking spaces per unit, or
they are
things like, we're talking, this is all conceptual, so we're not getting into the weeds about the infrastructure that's going to be needed. And that's the city's going to look at that when they look at an individual plan and say, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to widen the street, and Mr. Developer, I want you to pay 50% of the costs of widening the street. I understand that can't be put in the zoning, but would it be reasonable to put in the zoning things such as this area needs to be a gated community, or the streets within this community need to be configured in such a way to limit the amount of thoroughfare traffic that would be, so going back to this, lot we're talking about, we don't want that area to be a straightaway cut through from Borchard to Wendy. So how would you do that? Well, you do it by making it a gated community, or you do it by developing the community in such a way where you had cul-de-sacs and others. The street would be laid out in such a way that it wouldn't be convenient to use it as a thoroughfare. So at what point, to me, this would be considered objective standards in the, that the city would ask the developer to do. So when would the city actually put these requirements in place? And if they didn't, would they then be hogtied to not approve, to approve a project that, because
yeah, good question. So just really quickly, so there are going to be, I think, in the general plan, there are going to be areas of the city where we're going to know more about, where we're going to have developed ideas on that we can put additional policies in. So, sometimes we'll, like, for example, like the Oaks Mall, we may ultimately have a more focused section on that, where we have a goal and policies about what should happen at the Oaks Mall, and that will then guide zoning. So, I think, questions like the property you're talking about, I think it's possible for the general plan to include some policies about connectivity, buffers, residential, transitions of residential. So it's possible to include language about that in the general plan that then gets implemented through the zoning. It's also, for some bigger parcels, it's not uncommon to require a master planning process for an area that would allow a sort of a further refined discussion about specific areas. You still need to set the high level in the general plan about what the vision is overall, but then certain areas you can require a specific plan or a master plan process in order to dive into that detail, understanding that not every area is going to be a rectangular, easy to build 1 acre parcel that you don't really need to do that on. There's unique parcels, and the one you're referring to is a unique parcel. So that's a thought. That's something we certainly kicked around about how we make sure that on specific parcels, specific areas, we're providing that guidance that we really need to have to make sure the vision is implemented.
And then possibly my last question for the evening, but I never promised this. Why, well, when we talk about the ability to get affordable housing in there, that just doesn't seem to happen. Why? And I think somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, but that we don't have the teeth that we need. Why can that not be put in, that this is going to be mixed use housing, of which 20% has to be? Why can that not be put into the zoning so that the developers are bound by that from day one?
And you're talking overall in the city, correct?
Well, not overall in the city, but with the individual zoning areas. If they say that this is going to be mixed use, medium density mixed use, which I don't know, 15 to 30 units per acre. I forget what the numbers are, but why can it not be in there that the developers got to put something in where it's going to meet these reasonable RHNA numbers? So I mean, it's, to me, I look at this and I just say it's a crime that we have the houses that the places we built, and I think somebody said we had like 2 affordable units or something. It's a joke. So why don't we put some teeth into this when we develop these standards in these zoning?
Yeah, and Ian had mentioned this before. The best way to do it, the way that a lot of jurisdictions have done this, is to have a very strong inclusionary housing ordinance, so that any development that is built has a certain percentage of affordable units, regardless of where it is, even regardless of the density of what it is. That there's a certain.
Thousand Oaks?
So there is Ian, you might need to explain this. There is an ordinance on the books, but it isn't as strong as it could be. Does that describe that well enough?
Yeah, so it's applicable to for sale projects only. So apartments are not required to provide any affordability if they're allowed by right. But right now, it is, the only requirement is a 10% of the units have to be moderate. However, there's an option for an in lieu fee, and that in lieu fee was set at 0 back in 2011, 2012.
It was in response to the recession, I think.
Yes. So in any case, so right now there's not much, there's not really a requirement for that. Now, it is something that we are looking at as far as the city.
It's smoke and mirrors. We're talking about all this, and when it really comes down to it, it's smoke and mirrors, and we're talking about trying to provide betterment for the community and betterment for the state, and we're just putting plans together and sending them to Sacramento. We're not.
Well, so Karen, I'd recommend. So listen, I would say if this is something, the requirement for affordable housing is something that you're passionate about, I would recommend that it is part of the conversation that we have had internally. Again, I'm sort of like behind the curtains here in these meetings. I would recommend that you make sure that your representatives in the city know that this is something that you want, and they're called inclusionary housing ordinances. A lot of cities do 20%. They vary in terms of what levels of affordability, usually spread throughout the very low, moderate, and above moderate levels. And there's studies that need to be done by the city in order to enact them. But it is absolutely something that a lot of communities are doing, and it is one of the best ways to get affordable housing into the community. So, I'm a big housing advocate. I would encourage you to to write and push that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Roseanne, and then I saw Tim, and then Paul.
Okay.
Oh, Phil, were you after Roseanne?
Phil,
I'm
too,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Paul was before me too. Paul was before.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so I have two questions. One, I wanted to piggyback on the affordable housing issue. I know that I guess you call them RHNA numbers, are based on median income in the community. And I'm wondering the very lowest level, what does that realistically allow for somebody who's making, say, a $15 minimum wage, which would be like our kids who are just getting started in life and are working at a restaurant, to be able to afford housing? Because based on the numbers I've seen, I don't think it does. And that's a big concern to me. And I think it's a big concern for our community who would like our kids to be able to live here. So how do we address that?
That's a great question. Give me a minute and we can move on to a question. Let me come back to that because I think I have the numbers about what the income is and what that would take. But if we just sort of, you think about it, if you're making $15 an hour, your annual salary is $30,000 a year. So that would be, the sort of the very low or extremely low income. And the way that you get to that, they're much harder to build because it requires a lot more subsidy. But one of the ways that you get to that is by having the inclusionary housing ordinance and have require that some are at very low incomes. Now, typically if you're a 22-year-old and you're just graduating from college, you tend not to live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. You have roommates for a while. I certainly did. I'm sure a lot of us did, right? So that it's maybe 2 or 3 people, so it makes it a little bit more affordable. But the challenge is that for those who are making minimum wage or barely over minimum wage, it's very difficult to afford a place to live. And it's a very big challenge, and there's a big supply and demand, which is why the state has pushed for more housing in the state to have communities build more housing to, in the long term, address supply and demand.
Right. But,
okay.
I mean, the state numbers are not, at least in this community, the state numbers or the state parameters for each of those housing categories are not providing for housing at that level.
It's providing for some, but not all of it. No. Okay, Phil.
I had one more question if I could ask real quick.
Okay, go ahead. We have
with
time.
regard to what you're referring to as the Borchard wetlands, and I've heard about the parcel. I don't know exactly where it is, except I know it's in the Rancho Conejo area. Obviously, one of the reasons we're talking about building out areas like Thousand Oaks and other areas is because we want to avoid building in wildfire zones and open space zones. Why would we be building in a flood zone?
So if there is a flood zone, there are requirements. I haven't dug too deep into that parcel itself, but certainly if it's all in a flood zone and it's underwater, those are some of the things that, just like a steep slope, that you can't build in certain areas. My understanding is that, let's see, Michael, maybe you know a little bit more about this parcel, but it's not. The entire thing is not in a flood zone, and it is not a wetland. It is not a wetland, but there are some areas that are in a flood zone, and there are things that you can do in order to build. Michael, is there anything to add?
Yeah, I'm not intimately familiar with all the details of that property. I know there are portions of it that are in a floodplain, but I know there's portions of the single-family neighborhood to the west that are also in a floodplain. And because the floor level of the homes was raised out of the flood level, they were allowed to be built. So It's always possible to engineer around things like that, or like Matt said, if a portion of the property is in a floodplain, you could still potentially develop other parts of the property. And I'll just make a general comment too. I know we've already touched on this a lot in some of our other answers, but the general plan is a very high-level policy document that looks at broad scale. And we don't necessarily, for the general plan, get into the details of individual properties and what the constraints may or may not be on individual sites. This one is, because it's such a large property, it does, stand out on the map. But there's other properties in the city that have issues like steep slopes or heritage trees or things like that that are going to, in some way or another constrain how those properties can be developed. But we don't get into that level of detail in the general plan because we're staying at the broader policy level.
So that's also going to be dealt with in the zoning requirements?
A lot of that gets dealt with in the development review process for individual projects, right? Because we don't know whether a project is coming along, and if it is, that's when the project gets reviewed individually. So,
and who would be doing that review? Because my understanding is once the general plan is done, the city council is no longer reviewing development. So who would? The planning commission? I mean, how does that happen? Or is it just city staff?
Michael, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, the property would still be subject to whatever zoning is in place. We're also looking at potentially, we haven't fleshed out the details yet, but we are looking at putting a policy in the general plan that says that any properties over a certain size would have to be subject to a specific plan, which would then allow for a further level of review. Whether it would be the planning commission or city council specifically, we haven't gotten that far down the line yet. There are provisions, as we've discussed in state law, that once you allow for the possibility of residential on a site, that does change how that property can be considered as far as the discretionary ability of the city to control what gets built on the site. But that doesn't mean that the project would not still be subject to zoning requirements and subdivision requirements and any other standards like that that the city would impose through the zoning.
And public review process. So just because it's housing, it doesn't mean, and I just want to make sure that, and because I think you hinted at this, or at least I heard this and maybe you didn't mean it, but there's still a public review process for residential projects, even with SB 330. There's still a whole process that you have to go through in order for a project to be approved. It doesn't take that away. What it does is it stops essentially the arbitrary nature that was happening with development projects. And I can tell you lots of stories of city council meetings in other jurisdictions where the project came back 5, 6, 7 times, and the city council, even though it met every zoning standard that was in there, the city council was like, "Nah, I just kind of don't want it. Can you change the windows a little bit?" Right? So it takes that part away, but it doesn't take away the fact that there still needs to be a public process around these and a public decision-making process around a lot of these projects.
And what body of government does that public review process happen at then? Is that
be the planning commission and the city council?
Planning commission, so both same.
Yeah, it would be, it would be the city council is the one who's going to adopt the zoning ordinance that controls, what process development has to go through. So ultimately, they will decide at what level they want it reviewed. The limitation under SB 330 is that a project can't be forced to go through more than 5 public meetings. So that would be the limitation to address the issue that Matt brought up about other councils that may bring a project back multiple times. So they wouldn't be able to do that. But if the council wanted to retain its authority to review projects, then it would be up to them to put that requirement in the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay, and then just really quickly, Melissa, thank you for sending the information on income from 2019. Just as an example, if you are a one-person household, your income for a very low income, it's $36,000 a year. So that's about $16-17 an hour. That you would essentially qualify for very low income. If you're a 4-person household, median income is $97,000 in the in the county. And this is based on AMI, area median income, which is the county. And so that's what the standard is there. So there's a chart that was from I think it was the February of 2020 presentation. Melissa, help me out here. At the General Plan Advisory Committee meeting that went over this.
December
so that's
2019.
Online. Oh, December. Okay.
And I can send a link out to folks if you're curious. We have all of our General Plan Advisory Committee meeting presentations on the project website, and they are, for the most part, topic specific. So if you were curious more about, for example, housing, you could look at the presentation as well as the meeting notes.
Yep. So that was December, Roseanne, that's December 12th, 2019 on the GPAC. So Melissa, yeah, why don't you send that link out to the group in the chat. Okay, Phil, at long last, you've been patient. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is a map related question. I looked at your February 2nd presentation online, and I noticed the composite map from the GPAC meeting in the first few slides, where you talked about the public had input and had put stickers on the map, and you guys used that to develop the option plans. I noticed in regards to the Borchard Wetlands area, I guess that's the name of it now, that there was a green sticker on that, which you described as open space area. And then there seemed to be yellow stickers along Borchard, which you described as retail stickers. I'm curious what the process was for taking that green sticker from the public input and converting that to a multi-use area.
I just wanted, hey, Phil, I just want to jump in really quick because I sent you the composite map earlier today. The green sticker actually stands for town square, and the yellow sticker stands for, there's one on there for mixed use, multifamily home, and single family home. So I wasn't paying attention earlier, so I might have missed where Matt said open space.
Yeah, I might have misspoken. So I'm zooming in on this now, actually. And that composite map, this was from the General Plan Advisory Committee. That parcel had town square, single family, multifamily, and mixed use applied to that.
That's
so a combination of uses.
It was kind of hard to see online, but thank you, Kristen. Okay, so yeah, I saw that green and I was wondering what changed there, what caused that process to change. So thank you for answering that question.
Yep. And Phil, just so you know, like what we did in the process was there was that, and then there was the online survey where there was 461 people in the city went and put essentially virtual stickers on maps about where they wanted to see different uses. And so those are also available in the survey results from the MetroQuest survey. And Melissa, maybe you can send the link out for that as well, so you can see the flow of that information. And then what we did was we looked at that, and based on the conversation, as a basis for beginning to think about alternatives.
Okay, thank you. I had one other question, and this is is it Rory? You made a comment, something to the fact that there was a waiver or something in that Borchard Wetlands area. I'd never heard that before. Could you expand on what that comment, please?
No, there's no waiver that I know of. I think I don't know if it's still in effect, but Ventura County Flood Control District had a flood easement over a portion of the property.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Paul, you are next.
I have a few, but they're all quick. When does the infrastructure get addressed? Things like overcrowded roads, are we going to have enough water, redoing sewers? What phase?
That flows for infrastructure. Get it? Flows. That flows. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. It's been a long day. We get through this part first, and then we essentially look at what we think of as maybe realistic 20-year growth projections, and then it is based on that information. So the EIR will look at it to some degree, but also then the plans for individual utilities will look at it more specifically. So the water master plan, the sewer master plan, that those will look at it more specifically to make sure that there's capacity.
So that happens after the general plan and after zoning, or where in that whole process does it fall? The EIR will happen, and so we'll look at overall water capacity in the city. We'll look at vehicle miles traveled for transportation, which is the metric that's used from an environmental perspective. So that will all happen in the environmental impact report as part of this project. And so that will be available before the city makes a final decision. So as somebody that's jumped into this process recently, most of what you're talking about is new to me. And I can tell from a lot of the other questions, even people that have been following this, just don't understand what the process is. It's, what happens during the general plan, what happens during zoning, what happens after that, and every step seems to be pointed at the other step taken care of. So I don't know if there's an overall document that kind of describes what this process is, but I think that would help people if you put that on the website somewhere. Not the details of here's a meeting that we had that lasted 2 hours and you can read through it. Just kind of a flow chart.
Yeah, essentially a flow chart from the general plan all the way through to a development project and infrastructure decisions.
Well, infrastructure, and we've talked about zoning, we've talked about when do we do parks.
Yeah, but all the way through from vision to actual project built and what those steps are.
Yeah, I think it would help a lot of people understand it, because I know I'm very nervous about us getting locked into something we can't stop. But as I listen to this, I'm hearing you say, well, there's other places where we can take care of this. And, I don't know what those are.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can, there's information out there that I think we can put up on the general, so the overall development process from general plan all the way to development project that I think would help. Would help in that understanding, and it's very complicated. I mean, this is not simple stuff, and even those of us who do this every day or 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, there's lots of gaps in our knowledge overall of how do you do a sewer master plan for a community, right? I mean, there's lots of stuff that we need to rely on others to do as part of that process.
Yeah. So you can imagine.
We understand it's complicated. It's tough.
Like I was at the big meeting where you did the overall plan on the 2nd, I guess it was, and we were having these instant surveys, and I'm going, nothing to base this on, and I don't like any of the answers, but I still have to vote. So I ended up having to vote for things. I'm going, I would fight against this, but it's the best choice. So. I know the general survey is coming up. I thought we were supposed to wait until after these meetings before we did the survey, but it sounds like we should do them right away.
You don't have to. We're not looking at them until the survey closes. So that's actually a good point, which is take your time and look through it. And if you have follow-up questions, ask them before you fill out the survey. We don't allow people to take it multiple times. We want you to make sure that you have the information. So take it when you feel ready and comfortable to take the survey.
Okay. Another general question. We talk a lot about mixed use, and I'm sure somebody has run the numbers about what would the cost for somebody buying a place, cost for an end unit, a mixed use 2-bedroom place versus a two-bedroom house. I know this is just my personal philosophy, but I don't understand why anybody would live in mixed use, and yet that's what we're pushing. So
I will say, if you look at surveys, there are lots and lots and lots of people who want to live in mixed use buildings, who want to live in multifamily buildings. You know,
But are any of them in the upper income area, or is it?
Yeah.
Do you see it across incomes, or just the lower incomes can't afford houses?
No, not at all.
Okay.
There are lots of people who downsize from, and it's actually a strategy that AARP is promoting and has promoted for a very long time, so that people can remain in place in their community when they don't want to live in a single family home after the kids have moved out. You know, maybe a spouse has passed away, or as people get older, they can live stay in the community and don't have to move out to somewhere completely different, so that they can still be part of that community. It happens all over the place. So, and there's lots and lots of, we can give you tons of examples of places. You may not want to do it, but again, there's lots of people who do.
Oh yeah, that's why I was raising it. I know, you know, my opinion isn't always right.
But I think, Paul, the real concept here overall is to make sure and to allow people to have a choice, right? It's not to force people to live a certain way if you want to live that way. It's that people want different things. Some people want to live in a single family home. I live in a single family home. At this stage in my life, that's what I want to live in. Earlier in my life, I wanted to live in multifamily. As I get older, we've talked about going and living in a townhome or a multifamily. So, you know, there's different stages in life, and AARP really promotes this. And so I think it's about making sure that the community has choices about where people live. So it's really about choice, not about taking something away.
Is there a spot for more general comments, or just everything go through the survey and the map?
There are places in the survey for you to do more general comments. And then I think if you have just broadly more general comments, use the email address and write general comments to us. And we will get that, and we'll look at that as well. You can also type notes in the online briefing book. There's the opportunity for doing that. We'll look at those as well. But, you know, if you have a really specific idea and you don't feel like there's a place in the survey to tell us that idea, send an email and say, can you please consider this?
Okay, thanks.
I want to jump in. I would actually prefer if people put general comments in the briefing book. And the reason why I say that is because all the comments are public. And so everybody can see everybody's ideas, and maybe that will spark some other ideas from other people. I'm getting tons of emails and I do respond to them as soon as I get them, but I think it could be more beneficial if other people get to see your thoughts.
Okay, one last thing then is maybe you could take some of those things that you're seeing a lot of them on the website, because I'm sure you get tired of seeing the exact same comment 100 times, and somebody that wants to make a comment doesn't want to read 100 of those comments before they rewrite it. So there must be some way to kind of, I don't know, consolidate the process.
Well, you can see, so just a couple of things. So one is, again, with the tool that we have, it's called Conveo, you can see what other people's comments are on there. So, you know, you can see what other people have said. You can, you know, put your own comment on in addition to that. If you send an email, I agree with Kristen, thank you for correcting me and saying there is a value in dialogue, which is why we're having this and why we're having these meetings, so we can have this dialogue. So there's a value in doing that, and for you to put something that other people can see. If you write an email and there's something in there, other people can't see it, but also we are not going to respond to that email, and we're not going to be able to do sort of interim, here's what we're hearing so far, except through these meetings. We have dozen meetings that we're doing. There's a lot going on. So we'll do that at the end.
Can I make a quick comment on that? If you see somebody else's comment, you can put a thumbs up so it counts.
I was just going to mention that.
If you agree with that comment, rather than writing the same exact comment.
Okay, well, that count is.
I was just going to mention that. Thank you.
That count to you kind of like two people made it?
Yeah.
Since we're so used to like for anything, just for seeing it. Yeah.
You can also do a thumbs down too.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
but you know, please, like, you know, I think this goes without saying, but please be respectful. I mean, there's 100 and 30,000 people in the city now, and you know, many more different opinions than that. So there's lots of different ideas there. So yeah, share your ideas, give a thumbs up. If we're seeing a ton of thumbs up on an idea, well, you know, it has more impact than if just one person says it. So you know, go through and be thoughtful about it. Okay, Tim.
Just real
Patient.
quick. Hey, also you can do a thumbs up to your own comment, so it counts as twice. So
Careful about gaming the system here, folks.
I did 10, so I got a lot on mine, so it's good there. Hey, just first of all, I appreciate again you guys staying after hours to do this meeting. Really appreciate that. As I was looking through the land use map, and then I kind of look at traffic and stuff like that, I noticed that there's nothing down Potrero, you know, on our side, which is kind of across from Sherwood Country Club, that Lake Sherwood area, which is, there's so much open area over there. Is there a reason why that there's nothing even being looked over there, or just they have more money and they could sway us not to go that way?
Well, it didn't come up as, and Kristen, you want to jump in here?
We're gonna, Ian and I are double checking the land use map right now. I'm pretty sure a lot of that is designated open space.
Yeah, it may all be.
Which means you can't.
Well, I know. Right as you come over the hill by Hidden Meadows, you know, there's 3 huge houses with the acres and acres and yards, and you know, just not that I'm selling mine and they don't want to sell theirs, but if they were cut in half, a whole section could be done with whatever vision you see there, and the traffic doesn't get all the way into Thousand Oaks. It cuts before it gets to Thousand Oaks, Newbury Park, where it gets heavier, and we could stop it at the line. Plus it's, you know, it adds some retail where there's nothing over there. So everybody's got to drive, you know, probably 3 miles or 4 miles to get something. And it would seem like if you're trying to cut down on traffic and roads, that would be a good area that could be some low density housing or some, you know, nice commercial and some restaurants and stuff that they could probably use over in that area.
Yeah, and I will just say, it's a, you know, I mark that on the map. You know, again, we hadn't really heard a lot about that, so I encourage you to do that. I do want to comment that the decisions of retailers are very complex, and there is a push for consolidation in more specific locations, and the city overall has more retail than it needs, in more retail space than it needs, which you see just driving around, and the impact from COVID, I think, is going to multiply that. But let me just sort of a rule of thumb, a supermarket will need a shed of about 10,000 rooftops. So about 10,000 homes to support a supermarket. So if you think in that area, there might need to be a supermarket, you kind of look at the low density and you count, and that's how that's a rule of thumb. So what's happening is it makes it very difficult to put that retail in a way that's viable. It'd be great to do, so there's more retail right within walking distance of folks. I think that'd be awesome. And more spread out neighborhood centers. We have that to some degree in the plan, in the alternatives, but if it were more places, I think it'd be better. The retail market just doesn't support it.
Yeah, okay, appreciate it. Hey, thanks again, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay, so we have just a couple minutes. Are there any final thoughts, final questions? Can we all go the way of Karen and drink a really full glass of wine after this? Okay, well, again, thank you all for sharing your ideas. We absolutely appreciate the dialogue. It is, you know, as Paul said, this is very complex stuff. It's like drinking from a fire hose. We understand that. That's why we're having these meetings, to be able to answer some of these questions and get into the complexities and the details in a way that we can't in a 200-person meeting. So we're glad you all are joining. Please tell your friends. Chris, you haven't been involved. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everyone who hasn't been here before. Please tell your friends about the process and have them come to one of the future meetings.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.